Sepp Dietrich, Hitler's bodyguard. Sepp Dietrich was one of Adolf Hitler's most loyal and notorious followers. Born in 1892 in Bavaria, Dietrich grew up in a modest household before joining the German army during World War I. He was a brave soldier, wounded multiple times, and decorated with the Iron Cross. This early military service shaped his character and gave him the discipline that would later make him a key figure in Hitler's inner circle. After the war, Germany was a nation in turmoil. Veterans like Dietrich found themselves disillusioned and searching for purpose. It was in this chaotic environment that Dietrich discovered the rising National Socialist movement. Drawn to its promise to restoring German pride, he joined the Nazi Party in the early 1920s and quickly earned a reputation for his loyalty and toughness. Dietrich's path to prominence came through his relationship with Hitler himself. Unlike many Nazis who were more interested in politics, Dietrich was devoted to Hitler personally. In 1928, Hitler appointed him as one of his bodyguards, and from that moment, Dietrich's life became inseparably linked to the Führer. By 1932, Dietrich had risen to command the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, an elite SS unit formed specifically to protect Hitler. This unit began as a small bodyguard detachment, but quickly grew into a powerful military force. Under Dietrich's command, the Leibstandarte developed a reputation for discipline, loyalty, and ruthless efficiency. When Hitler seized power in 1933, Dietrich was at his side. He oversaw the expansion of the Leibstandarte into a regiment that became a cornerstone of the Waffen-SS. His devotion earned him rapid promotions, and by the outbreak of World War II, he was one of the most powerful men in Hitler's personal guard. Dietrich was not just a ceremonial guard. He led his troops into combat during the invasion of Poland in 1939 and later in the Western campaigns of 1940. Unlike some political generals, Dietrich was admired by his men as a soldier's soldier. He shared their hardships, treated them with respect, and became a symbol of SS fighting spirit. But Dietrich's loyalty to Hitler also drew him into darker roles. In 1934, during the Night of the Long Knives, Dietrich and his men participated in the purge of the SA leadership, executing Hitler's rivals without hesitation. This cemented the SS's role as Hitler's personal weapon of terror, and Dietrich's reputation as a man willing to kill on command. As the war continued, Dietrich commanded SS units on the Eastern Front, where brutal fighting and atrocities against civilians were commonplace. His Leibstandarte became infamous not only for its battlefield successes, but also for war crimes committed under its watch. This dual legacy of bravery and brutality has made Dietrich one of the most controversial figures of the Nazi regime. By 1944, Dietrich had risen to the rank of SS Obergruppenführer, one of the highest in the SS hierarchy. He played a major role in the Ardennes Offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, where his forces initially achieved success but ultimately failed. Hitler's trust in Dietrich never wavered, but the war was turning against Germany, and even his loyal bodyguard could not protect him from defeat. In the final days of the Reich, Dietrich remained at Hitler's side, still bound by the loyalty that had defined his entire career. When the war ended, he was captured by the Allies and later tried for war crimes. His life remains a stark reminder of how personal devotion can lead a man to participate in some of history's darkest events. Dietrich's power within the SS was not based on intellectual brilliance but on loyalty and charisma. Unlike Himmler, who was ideological and bureaucratic, Dietrich was more of a frontline commander, loved by his troops. This gave him a unique place in the Nazi hierarchy. He was both feared and respected, not only because of his closeness to Hitler, but also because of his ability to inspire those under his command. His soldiers admired him for leading from the front. Dietrich was known for sharing the dangers of combat, riding into battle with his men rather than directing from behind. This earned him the reputation of being approachable and humane to his troops, a sharp contrast to the ruthless image of the SS as a whole. It was this bond with his men that made the Leibstandarte one of the most formidable units in the German military. However, Dietrich's leadership also meant he was directly tied to the darker side of Nazi warfare. His unit was implicated in massacres and executions, particularly in Eastern Europe. Though he often claimed ignorance of these crimes, historians note that a commander of his stature could not have been completely unaware. His legacy is therefore one of deep contradiction, bravery on the battlefield, but complicity in atrocities. During the invasion of France in 1940, Dietrich's men distinguished themselves with rapid advances and fierce fighting. Hitler saw these victories as proof that his personal guard could be trusted not only for protection, but also as an elite fighting force. This success led to further expansion of the Waffen-SS, with Dietrich serving as one of its most prominent generals. By 1941, when Germany turned east against the Soviet Union, Dietrich was commanding larger formations than ever before. The Eastern Front was a brutal theater, and Dietrich's forces were often involved in the most intense battles, including the struggle for Kharkov and Kursk. His reputation as a fearless commander grew, but so too did the accusations of brutality associated with his men. The bond between Dietrich and Hitler was unusually personal. Hitler referred to him as Sepp, a term of familiarity, and often turned to him in moments of crisis. Dietrich in turn viewed Hitler as more than just a leader. He was almost a father figure, someone to whom Dietrich gave unwavering loyalty. This personal devotion distinguished him from many other Nazi leaders who saw Hitler as a means to power. In 1943, as the war dragged on, Dietrich was given command of the 1st SS Panzer Corps. His forces played major roles in battles across Italy and later in Normandy following the Allied invasion. The Leibstandarte, though depleted, continued to fight fiercely under his leadership, reinforcing his image as a determined and committed soldier, even as Germany's situation grew desperate. Perhaps Dietrich's most controversial moment came during the Battle of the Bulge in 1944. His troops were involved in the Malmedy massacre, where American prisoners of war were executed by SS soldiers under his command. Though Dietrich denied giving such orders, the stain of this war crime would follow him for the rest of his life, eventually leading to his prosecution after the war. As Germany collapsed in 1945, Dietrich's loyalty never wavered. Even when defeat was inevitable, he continued to fight, unwilling to abandon Hitler. In the final days of the Reich, Dietrich remained one of the few high-ranking officers who had not betrayed or questioned the Führer. This blind loyalty, once a source of strength, ultimately tied him to the fall of the regime. Captured by the Allies after Germany's surrender, Dietrich faced trial at Nuremberg and later in Dachau for war crimes including the Malmedy massacre. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, later reduced to 25 years. Though released in the 1950s, he lived the rest of his life in obscurity, still admired by some of his former soldiers, but condemned by history as both a loyal soldier and a participant in one of the darkest chapters of humanity. Dietrich's life was deeply tied to the rise of Hitler and the Nazi Party. Before the war, he had been one of the original members of Hitler's inner circle, personally guarding him at rallies and party meetings. This proximity gave him enormous influence, even though he was not a political thinker. He was proof that in Hitler's Germany, loyalty often mattered more than intellect or ideology. As the SS grew in size and power, Dietrich's Leibstandarte evolved from a small guard unit into a full mechanized division. This transformation symbolized the militarization of the Nazi state itself. What began as a personal bodyguard for one man became a war machine capable of devastating entire regions. And at the heart of this transformation stood Sepp Dietrich, the soldier who had pledged his life to Hitler. In combat, Dietrich earned respect not only from his men, but also from his enemies. Reports from Allied soldiers who faced his divisions in Normandy often spoke of their fierce determination and skill. Dietrich's units were rarely defeated in open battle. This military effectiveness, however, came at a terrible cost, as civilian populations often bore the brunt of SS brutality. Dietrich was not known for strategic brilliance in the way that commanders like Rommel or Manstein were. Instead, his strength lay in execution and morale. He was the kind of leader who inspired troops to keep fighting against overwhelming odds. For Hitler, this was invaluable. As Germany faced repeated defeats, he relied more than ever on men like Dietrich to hold the line. Yet this loyalty to Hitler would also be Dietrich's downfall. In the final months of the war, when Germany was collapsing, some generals urged surrender to spare lives. Dietrich refused. His devotion to Hitler blinded him to the reality of the situation. In a sense, he represented the tragic flaw of the Nazi elite, loyalty carried to the point of destruction. During the Battle of Berlin, although Dietrich was not in the city itself, he directed units that attempted to relieve the capital. These efforts were doomed from the start, but they illustrate his refusal to abandon Hitler, even when all hope was lost. For him, loyalty was not a choice, but a duty, even at the cost of his soldiers' lives. When Dietrich was captured by American forces in May 1945, his reputation as one of Hitler's closest companions made him a high-profile prisoner. Unlike many SS leaders who tried to distance themselves from Hitler, Dietrich openly admitted his devotion. This honesty, rare among captured Nazis, surprised his interrogators, but also sealed his fate in the trials that followed. At the Nuremberg trials, Dietrich faced charges related to the Waffen-SS and war crimes committed under his command. Though he denied personal responsibility, prosecutors argued that his position as commander made him culpable. His defense leaned heavily on the idea that he was a soldier, not a politician. But the atrocities associated with his units told another story. The Malmedy massacre trial was particularly significant. American prosecutors highlighted the execution of U.S. prisoners as a symbol of SS cruelty. Dietrich insisted he had never given such an order, and evidence suggested that lower-ranking officers carried out the killings. Still, as commander, he bore responsibility. This trial cemented his reputation as both a capable general and a war criminal. Imprisoned after the war, Dietrich lived in relative obscurity. Unlike Himmler, who took his own life, or Goering, who remained defiant, Dietrich faded quietly. His post-war years were marked by ill health and financial struggle. Yet he never renounced his loyalty to Hitler, continuing to speak of him with admiration even after the full extent of Nazi crimes was revealed. For some veterans of the Waffen-SS, Dietrich became a symbol of camaraderie and honor. To them, he was a leader who cared for his men, a stark contrast to the cold, ideological bureaucrats of the regime. This image of Dietrich as a soldier's soldier allowed him to retain a degree of respect among former comrades. Historians, however, have been less forgiving. While acknowledging his bravery and popularity among the troops, they emphasize his role in enabling Hitler's dictatorship and the atrocities of the SS. For them, Dietrich's story is not one of honor, but of the dangers of blind loyalty to a destructive leader. Dietrich's personality was also complex. He was not highly educated, and by most accounts, he lacked the intellectual sharpness of other Nazi leaders. Yet his emotional intelligence, his ability to connect with ordinary soldiers made him one of the most effective commanders in the SS. This blend of loyalty, charisma, and brutality defined his career. As the Cold War began, Dietrich's story faded from public view, overshadowed by larger figures like Himmler and Goebbels. Still, his case remains important for understanding how personal devotion to Hitler sustained the Nazi regime. Without men like Sepp Dietrich, Hitler's power would not have lasted as long as it did. Dietrich's death in 1966 closed the chapter on one of the last living links to Hitler's inner circle. His funeral was attended by former SS soldiers, some of whom still saw him as a hero. Yet to the wider world, he remained a convicted war criminal, remembered less for his courage in battle than for his role in one of history's darkest regimes. The story of Sepp Dietrich is ultimately one of contradictions. He was both admired and condemned, both loyal and guilty, both soldier and criminal. His life forces us to consider the question, can personal bravery and loyalty ever excuse complicity in evil? The answer, for most historians, is no. And yet studying figures like Dietrich is essential for understanding the mechanics of dictatorship. Hitler needed not just ideologues like Himmler or propagandists like Goebbels, but loyal warriors like Dietrich to hold his empire together. In this way, Dietrich's role becomes a vital piece of the puzzle in explaining how Nazi Germany functioned. The enduring lesson of Sepp Dietrich's life is the danger of placing loyalty above morality. His story reminds us that devotion, when misdirected, can become destructive. By tying his fate to Hitler, Dietrich ensured that his own legacy would forever be stained by association with tyranny and genocide. Today, Sepp Dietrich stands as a cautionary tale, a man who rose from humble beginnings to the heights of power, only to fall into disgrace because of the leader he chose to serve. His life reflects the broader tragedy of Nazi Germany: brilliance, courage, and loyalty twisted into instruments of destruction. Sepp Dietrich's journey began far from the grand stages of history. Born in 1892 in Hauingen, Bavaria, he grew up in a simple farming family. His childhood was shaped by rural traditions, discipline, and a sense of hard work that would later influence his military career. There was nothing in his early life to suggest that he would one day become one of Adolf Hitler's most trusted men. When World War I erupted in 1914, Dietrich enlisted in the German army, like millions of other young men. He served with distinction on the Western Front, experiencing the horrors of trench warfare and chemical weapons. For him, the war was both devastating and formative. The defeat of Germany in 1918 left him, like many veterans, disillusioned and resentful. After the war, Dietrich, like countless former soldiers, struggled to reintegrate into civilian life. Jobs were scarce, inflation was rampant, and the humiliation of the Treaty of Versailles weighed heavily on the national psyche. For men like him, who had lived and fought in the trenches, civilian life seemed empty. The stage was set for radical movements to recruit disenchanted veterans. Dietrich drifted toward paramilitary groups known as the Freikorps, right-wing militias composed largely of ex-soldiers. These groups fought against communists, strikers, and uprisings across Germany. For Dietrich, this was familiar ground: the camaraderie of soldiers, the sense of mission, and the use of violence to achieve political ends. These experiences hardened him and brought him closer to extremist circles. By the early 1920s, Dietrich had crossed paths with Adolf Hitler, who was then a rising political agitator in Munich. Hitler needed loyal men who could provide security for Nazi rallies and protect him from opponents. Dietrich's background as a soldier and his reputation for toughness made him an ideal candidate. Thus began a partnership that would shape both men's destinies. Dietrich became part of Hitler's personal bodyguard, a role that gave him unique access to the future dictator. While many early Nazis jockeyed for political influence, Dietrich distinguished himself by his unwavering loyalty. He was not a strategist or an intellectual. Instead, he was a man who could be trusted to follow orders without question. The failed beer hall putsch of 1923 marked a turning point for both Hitler and Dietrich. Although the coup attempt collapsed, it revealed the determination of the Nazi movement. Dietrich remained committed to Hitler, even during his imprisonment. This steadfastness would not be forgotten, and it solidified his place among Hitler's inner circle. As the Nazi Party rose in the 1930s, Dietrich's role expanded. The SS, initially just a small group of bodyguards, grew into a formidable organization. Dietrich was instrumental in this transformation, helping mold the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, Hitler's elite guard unit, into a disciplined military force. His men were fiercely loyal, bound by both ideology and personal devotion to Hitler. Dietrich's loyalty was tested during the Night of the Long Knives in 1934, when Hitler purged the leadership of the SA. Dietrich played a direct role in this bloody event, commanding units that arrested and executed rivals of the Führer. His willingness to act decisively during this crisis further elevated his standing. From this point onward, he was not just a guard, but a trusted enforcer. With the outbreak of World War II, Dietrich's military career entered its most prominent phase. He commanded the Leibstandarte in Poland, France, and later in the Balkans. His men quickly earned a reputation as both effective and ruthless. In France, they spearheaded daring advances, but they also left behind a trail of atrocities against civilians and prisoners. This dual image, brilliant soldiers but brutal occupiers, defined the Waffen-SS. During the invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, Dietrich's forces participated in Operation Barbarossa. The campaign revealed the sheer scale of Nazi ambition, as well as the cruelty of the war in the East. Dietrich's units fought ferociously, but they were also complicit in massacres and scorched earth tactics. The Eastern Front hardened him further, reinforcing the idea that total war required total brutality. Dietrich's closeness to Hitler meant he often bypassed traditional military channels. He could appeal directly to the Führer for supplies, reinforcements, or promotions, frustrating regular army officers. This privilege reflected Hitler's trust in Dietrich, but also deepened the rift between the Wehrmacht and the SS. Dietrich was not a brilliant strategist, but he was invaluable as a loyal commander. As the tide of the war turned against Germany, Dietrich's responsibilities grew heavier. He commanded entire SS armies in Italy and later in the Balkans. During the D-Day landings in Normandy in 1944, his forces were among those tasked with repelling the Allied invasion. Though they fought fiercely, the overwhelming Allied air and naval power forced them into retreat. The Battle of the Bulge was perhaps Dietrich's most famous campaign. Hitler entrusted him with leading the 6th Panzer Army in the desperate counteroffensive in late 1944. While his troops initially achieved surprise, logistical failures and stiff Allied resistance doomed the operation. For Dietrich, it was both a moment of prominence and a reminder of Germany's declining fortunes. The Malmedy massacre, in which American prisoners of war were executed by SS troops under his overall command, haunted his legacy. Though evidence suggests he did not personally order the killings, his leadership role made him accountable. This atrocity became a symbol of the Waffen-SS's disregard for the rules of war. By early 1945, Dietrich's loyalty to Hitler remained unshaken, even as the Reich crumbled. When others considered surrender, he continued to fight. His soldiers, weary and outnumbered, respected his determination, but knew defeat was inevitable. In April, with Berlin under siege, Dietrich commanded units that tried to reach the capital. These last-ditch efforts failed, but they reflected his refusal to abandon Hitler. Captured by American forces in May 1945, Dietrich was interrogated extensively. Unlike many Nazis who tried to shift blame or reinvent themselves, he remained blunt and consistent. He admitted his devotion to Hitler and his role in the Waffen-SS, though he denied knowledge of specific crimes. His candor made him unusual, but did little to spare him from trial. The Nuremberg process and subsequent trials brought Dietrich face to face with justice. Convicted for his role in war crimes, he was sentenced to prison. The Malmedy trial, in particular, left him with a lasting stain. He insisted he had been a soldier, not a criminal, but international opinion was unforgiving. Dietrich served time in prison, during which his health deteriorated. His years behind bars reflected the collapse of the Nazi dream he had so faithfully served. Released in the mid-1950s, he lived quietly, though he maintained ties with former SS comrades. To the end, he never renounced Hitler, a fact that disturbed many who had hoped for reflection or remorse. Among veterans of the Waffen-SS, Dietrich retained a degree of respect. They remembered him as a commander who cared for his men and shared their hardships. For them, his loyalty was a virtue. Yet for historians, his story illustrates the dangers of such loyalty when it is directed toward a tyrant. Dietrich's death in 1966 marked the end of one of Hitler's most devoted followers. His funeral was attended by many former SS soldiers, a reminder of how memory and legacy can be contested. Some saw him as a fallen hero, others as a criminal who enabled one of history's greatest evils. In the decades since, scholars have debated Dietrich's legacy. Was he merely a soldier following orders, or was he an enabler of atrocities? The evidence points to the latter. His command positions and direct involvement in Hitler's purges make it clear that he was more than just a passive participant. Dietrich's lack of intellectual pretension made him different from other Nazi elites. He was not a schemer like Himmler or a propagandist like Goebbels. He was a man of action, defined by loyalty and brutality. In some ways, this made him more dangerous, for he represented the ordinary soldier elevated to extraordinary crimes. For modern audiences, Dietrich's life offers lessons about the risks of blind obedience. It shows how ordinary virtues, loyalty, courage, determination